On the night of September 12, 1997, a birthday party in the small town of Maplewood turned into a nightmare no one would ever forget. 12 children, ages ranging from 6 to 12, vanished without a trace. One moment, they were playing, laughing, and celebrating at young Emma Smith's birthday party. The next, they were gone. The parents searched frantically, but the house was eerily quiet, and there was no sign of struggle. The children had simply disappeared. The police were called in immediately, but despite hours of searching the surrounding area, there was no evidence to explain their sudden disappearance. No footprints, no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. The only thing that remained was a mystery. The community, once peaceful and carefree, was thrown into a state of panic. The town's sense of security shattered overnight. As days turned into weeks, the investigation stalled. No ransom note, no clues. The media turned the case into a spectacle, with theories ranging from a local abduction to an elaborate prank gone wrong. Yet, nothing concrete emerged. The case grew colder by the day, with each passing year, leaving only questions and a growing sense of dread. Then, in 2023, an FBI agent stumbled upon a photograph from that fateful night, one that had been overlooked for years. The photograph was innocent enough, featuring the children standing around Emma, smiling. But in the background, partially obscured by a shadow, was a cryptic symbol no one had noticed before. This image would be the key to uncovering the truth behind the shocking events of that night. In the heart of the small town of Maplewood, located in the quiet hills of Ohio, the Smith family's home was known for its warmth and inviting atmosphere. Emma Smith, the youngest of 3 children, was about to turn 8. Her parents, Sarah and Thomas Smith, had decided to throw a birthday party at their large old farmhouse, inviting the neighborhood children. The evening promised to be full of fun, laughter, and memories, as Sarah had spent days preparing for the event, decorating the house with balloons, preparing games, and baking Emma's favorite cake. At around 6:30 p.m., the children arrived in excited groups, ready to play the games Sarah had prepared. They ran through the sprawling backyard, jumping into the bouncy castle and playing tag around the old oak tree. The adults gathered inside the house, chatting and enjoying drinks. It was an idyllic scene, one that seemed like the picture of a perfect, carefree evening. But as the sun set and the party continued, something unsettling began to unfold. By 9 p.m., the children had been playing outside for hours, but no one noticed the time slipping away. Around 9:30 p.m., Emma's father, Thomas, went outside to round up the children for cake. The yard, once filled with laughter and the sounds of games, was now empty. He called out to the children, expecting to hear their usual responses or see them running toward the house. But there was no answer. Confused, Thomas checked the bouncy castle, the swings, the nearby woods, but the children were nowhere to be found. Panicked, Thomas immediately ran inside and informed Sarah, who thought he was joking at first. But when she stepped outside, the horror began to set in. The yard was quiet, and there were no signs of the children anywhere. Neighbors rushed over to help with the search. Local authorities were called, and soon the search expanded to the town. The police combed through every inch of the area, interviewed witnesses, and investigated every lead. But there were no clues, no footprints, no personal belongings, no trace of the children. It was as though they had vanished into thin air. The town, once peaceful and full of life, was thrown into chaos. The media descended upon Maplewood, reporting on the case as it captured the public's attention. Theories swirled. Was it a mass abduction? Had the children run away? Were there local criminals involved? Despite all the attention, no answers emerged. The case grew colder as days turned into weeks. Desperation set in. Families, once hopeful, now faced a grim reality. Their children were gone, and no one could tell them why. For years, the town of Maplewood lived in fear, haunted by the unanswered questions. The police had no leads, and the case quickly faded from the headlines. But the mystery didn't disappear. It simmered beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. The town of Maplewood slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy after the disappearances, though the haunting memory of that night lingered in the hearts of its residents. For 6 years, the mystery remained unsolved, and the case was officially closed by the police. The Smiths, devastated by the loss of their daughter Emma and the other children, moved away in search of peace, but no place could soothe the pain of their memories. The families tried to rebuild their lives, each of them coping with the emptiness left behind by the missing children in their own way. In 2023, the story seemed to have all but faded from the public consciousness. That was, until a young FBI agent, Emily Richards, stumbled across the case files while reviewing cold cases for a routine investigation into unsolved abductions across the country. Richards was a bright, methodical investigator, known for her tenacity in solving even the most obscure of mysteries. She had been working on a project to re-examine old case files that might have been overlooked or dismissed in the past, using advancements in technology and forensic methods that hadn't been available when the cases were first closed. As she went through the list of cases, Richards noticed something peculiar about the Maplewood case. Despite the attention it had received when it first occurred, the file appeared incomplete. Key details were missing, details that could potentially offer new insight into the case. She asked to review the photographs taken from that fateful night in 1997, hoping to find any new evidence or clues that might have been overlooked. It was then that Richards discovered something chilling. Among the photos of the party, one image stood out, a seemingly innocuous group photo of the children standing together around Emma, with the adults in the background. The children were all smiling, their faces bright with joy. But there, hidden in the background, was something that had gone unnoticed before. A cryptic symbol etched into the wood of the old oak tree in the backyard. It was subtle, but clear enough to be seen when the photograph was zoomed in. Richards couldn't explain why she hadn't seen it before, but it was there. The symbol, a series of interlocking circles, was familiar to her. It was a symbol often associated with underground cults and secret societies. It was the type of symbol used in rituals, and it set off a red flag in Richard's mind. Could the symbol have been a clue? Could it be that the disappearance of the children wasn't just a random act, but part of a larger, more sinister plot? Driven by curiosity and the possibility of a breakthrough, Richards began digging deeper. She pulled the Smith family's old records, trying to trace any connections to unusual groups or individuals. It wasn't long before she discovered that the Smiths had lived near a secluded area of Maplewood, an area that had a long history of strange occurrences and rumors of mysterious gatherings. The more she learned, the more it seemed that something darker was at play in the town. Richards became obsessed with the case, spending sleepless nights piecing together the puzzle. During her investigation, Richards reached out to several former residents of Maplewood who had moved away in the years following the disappearance. One of them, a retired journalist named John Morris, revealed a startling detail. Morris had been a reporter in the town at the time of the disappearances, and he told Richards that there had been rumors of a secret society operating within the town for years. The members were rumored to be wealthy and powerful individuals, their influence extending far beyond the small community. Richards listened carefully as Morris explained that there were whispers of a ritualistic tradition that the members of this society adhered to, one that involved children. However, these were just rumors, and no concrete evidence had ever surfaced to back up these claims. Morris himself had never investigated the story deeply, fearing for his own safety, as some of the rumored individuals were prominent figures in the town and its economy. As Richards gathered more evidence, she began to piece together a chilling possibility. What if the disappearance of the children at Emma Smith's birthday party was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern? What if the cryptic symbol was more than just a random design, but a marker of a ritual tied to the secret society in Maplewood? With this new theory in mind, Richards decided to investigate the Smith family's history in greater detail. She learned that the Smiths had been involved in the town's social circle, with Sarah Smith having connections to several influential families in Maplewood. Could it be that the children had been taken for a ritual sacrifice as part of this dark society? The more she uncovered, the more Richards felt like she was on the edge of uncovering something that had been hidden for decades. Her heart raced with each new discovery, but she knew that she was up against a powerful and secretive group. Someone, somewhere, was determined to keep the truth buried. Richards couldn't let this mystery slip through her fingers. The case of the 12 missing children was no longer just a cold case. It had become a deadly game, one that she was determined to solve, no matter the cost. Agent Emily Richards knew she had stumbled upon something bigger than just a cold case. The symbol in the photograph, coupled with the rumors of a secret society, had changed the entire trajectory of her investigation into the 12 missing children. No longer was it simply a tragic disappearance. It was now a potential link to something far more sinister, a hidden world that was operating under the radar for years. As her research deepened, Richards realized that she was walking into dangerous territory. But she had no choice. The children deserved answers, and she would be the one to find them. Richards first reached out to the local law enforcement in Maplewood, hoping they could help her fill in the gaps. She was met with resistance. The sheriff's office had long closed the case, and the few officers left in the town were either retired or had little interest in reopening such an old investigation. Richards wasn't discouraged. She pushed forward, requesting access to the town's old police files. The records she reviewed were sparse, but one thing stood out. There had been a brief mention of a strange group of individuals seen in the area around the time of the party. The document described unusual gatherings taking place in the woods, but no names were ever connected to these events. The records were inconclusive and led nowhere. Richards needed more information. She returned to the town of Maplewood, this time with a more specific focus. Instead of general inquiries, she began visiting the local residents who had been around at the time of the disappearances. Many had moved away, but some still lived in the area, and their memories could prove to be invaluable. Her first visit was to John Morris, the retired journalist who had previously mentioned the secret society. When Richard sat down with him, he was hesitant to speak at first, clearly still haunted by the events of that night. "I've always regretted not investigating further," Morris confessed. "But I was just a reporter, not a detective. Those people, those families, had too much power. I wasn't willing to risk everything for a story." Richards pressed him. "What did you know about the gatherings? Who were the people involved?" Morris shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting to the window. They were mostly wealthy landowners, businessmen, people you wouldn't expect to be involved in anything criminal. "But I've heard rumors, things I couldn't quite confirm. People said these gatherings were ritualistic in nature, involving children. I didn't want to believe it, but there was always a sense that something wasn't right with this town." Richard's stomach turned as she listened. Ritualistic, that word echoed in her mind. The connection between the photograph symbol and these alleged gatherings was no coincidence. But to prove this, she would need concrete evidence, and that meant digging deeper into the town's history. Richards then visited the local library, where she met Helen Packer, a longtime resident and historian of the town. Helen was older now, but had an impeccable memory for details, especially those related to the town's more shadowy past. As they spoke, Richards learned that the Smith family had been deeply embedded in the social and economic fabric of Maplewood, but there was something more troubling. "Sarah Smith," Helen said, lowering her voice, was part of a social group that met occasionally. It wasn't widely known, but I heard they would gather at the old Braxton estate. Richard's pulse quickened. The Braxton estate had always been a part of Maplewood's lore, a decaying mansion that no one really spoke about. It had belonged to the Braxton family, an old money family with significant influence in the area. But after the last Braxton family member died, the estate had been abandoned. The idea that Sarah Smith, along with other influential people, might have visited the estate for these secret gatherings was a revelation. It was the break Richards needed. She thanked Helen and immediately began planning her next step. She needed to get access to the Braxton estate. She contacted a local realtor, posing as someone interested in purchasing the property. It wasn't long before she arranged a tour. The realtor, an older man named Tom Jenkins, led Richards through the overgrown grounds of the estate. The mansion loomed above them, dark and foreboding, its windows like eyes that had long since lost their clarity. As she stepped inside, the musty air filled her lungs, and a feeling of unease settled over her. The house was ancient, its decor frozen in time, as if the occupants had just walked away one day and never returned. As Richards explored the estate, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Every shadow seemed to move, and every creak of the old floorboards made her jump. She made her way through the rooms, taking notes and photographs, but it wasn't until she reached the basement that she found something significant. Hidden beneath a layer of dust, she uncovered a trapdoor, partially concealed by a thick carpet. Her heart pounded in her chest as she cautiously opened it, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. Without hesitation, she descended. The air in the basement was stale, and the walls were lined with old. Agent Emily Richards couldn't shake the eerie feeling that the Braxton estate was the key to unraveling the mystery of the 12 missing children. Every step she took in that forsaken house only deepened the sense that something malevolent had taken place there. The basement, with its strange markings and ritualistic remnants, suggested that the disappearances weren't just the work of random criminals, but part of something far more intricate and sinister. The connection between the estate, the secret society, and the Smith family was undeniable. But Richards needed more than suspicions. She needed concrete evidence. After returning to her office, Richards pored over the photographs she had taken in the basement. The markings on the floor, though disorganized and faded, resembled something she had seen in occult literature. They were symbols tied to ancient rituals, some of which were rumored to involve sacrifice or mind manipulation. Precisely the kind of practices one might associate with the underground society she was investigating. But the symbols alone weren't enough to convict anyone. She needed to understand the full scope of what had happened in that house all those years ago. Her breakthrough came when she stumbled upon an old letter among the Braxton family's estate records. The letter, dated from 1996, was written by none other than Sarah Smith, the mother of Emma Smith, one of the missing children. The letter was addressed to Elijah Braxton, the last known heir to the estate, and it mentioned a project that would reap great benefits for both parties. The letter spoke cryptically about a plan that required cooperation, but the details were vague, leaving more questions than answers. Richards immediately recognized the significance of the letter. Why would Sarah Smith, a seemingly respectable woman, be involved in a project with a member of the Braxton family? The mention of cooperation struck a chord. Could it be that Sarah Smith had known about the disappearances, or worse, had actively participated in them? The idea was almost too horrific to consider. But Richards had learned by now that the truth often came with uncomfortable revelations. Determined to dig deeper, Richards reached out to Elijah Braxton's estate lawyer, a man named Richard Halley, who had represented the Braxton family for decades. When Richards explained her interest in the case and mentioned Sarah Smith's involvement, Halley was initially reluctant to cooperate. But after a few rounds of questioning, the lawyer finally relented. Sarah Smith was always involved in charity work, Hallie said, rubbing his forehead nervously. She was dedicated to causes that helped children. But her connection to the Braxtons, well, that's a story no one knows fully. Elijah Braxton was very secretive. I can tell you this, though. There were rumors of him being part of something powerful. Powerful in what way? Richards pressed. Hallie hesitated before responding. There were whispers of a secret society. I don't know what it was about, but Elijah Braxton seemed to have a lot of influence, even over people who seemed to have no connection to him. It's not just about wealth. There was something darker. Something I don't think I ever fully understood. The vague answers only fueled Richard's suspicions. The pieces were falling into place, but there was still no clear answer about the children's fate. Richards knew she had to get into the deeper history of the society, to uncover what it truly stood for and how it connected to the Smiths. As she continued her research, she came across something disturbing. Elijah Braxton had kept detailed journals about his family and the activities that took place on the estate. But those journals weren't available to the public. They had been locked away in a hidden room beneath the Braxton estate. The thought of the journals being locked away disturbed Richards. The idea of someone trying to bury the truth in such a manner made it clear that she was getting closer to the heart of the mystery. Without hesitation, she began making plans to return to the Braxton estate. But this time, she wasn't going alone. She enlisted the help of Agent Ryan Morales, a fellow investigator who had been assigned to the case after Richards presented her findings. Morales had an eye for detail and a quick wit, making him an invaluable asset to the investigation. Together, they would enter the estate and uncover the truth. When Richards and Morales arrived at the estate, the oppressive atmosphere of the mansion seemed to swallow them whole. The estate, despite its age and wear, still held a strange grandeur, as though the mansion had been frozen in time, preserving its dark past. Richards led the way through the main floor, retracing her steps from her previous visit. They made their way to the basement once more, where she had previously found the strange markings. This time, however, they would focus on the secret room, if it even existed. Richards had seen no evidence of it during her earlier visit, but based on Hallie's description of the hidden journals, she knew it was there. They found an old door behind a decaying bookshelf, covered in dust and cobwebs. The door was locked, but the moment Richards touched the discovery of Elijah Braxton's journals was both a revelation and a heavy burden. As Agent Emily Richards and Agent Ryan Morales stood in the dimly lit room of the Braxton estate, the weight of their findings hit them both. The truth, once elusive, had now emerged from the shadows in a form too dark to ignore. The journals described in chilling detail the ritualistic practices of the Circle, a secretive and powerful society that had operated in the town for decades. The children who had disappeared, including the 12 from Emma Smith's birthday party, had not been taken at random. They had been carefully chosen, groomed, and eventually sacrificed as part of an ancient and disturbing ritual. Richards closed the journal with a deep sigh, her mind racing with the implications of what they had just uncovered. The missing children were not just victims of an isolated crime. They were tools sacrificed to maintain the influence and power of the society that had silently controlled the town of Maplewood for generations. The name of the group, the Circle, had been a whispered rumor in the town, a ghost story that seemed far too unbelievable for anyone to investigate seriously. But now, the proof was undeniable. The next step was clear. Richards and Morales needed to confront those still alive who were linked to the Circle. They needed to connect the dots between the Braxton estate, the Smith family, and the powerful families in the town who had turned a blind eye to the dark events unfolding under their noses. Richards quickly scanned through the rest of the journals, hoping to find any mention of the society's members. The journals were cryptic, often referencing rituals and ceremonies without fully explaining the individuals involved. However, one name appeared repeatedly: Charles Forsyth, a wealthy landowner whose name had once been synonymous with the town's prosperity. Forsyth had been a close associate of Elijah Braxton, and the journals described him as one of the main architects of the ritualistic practices at the estate. Forsyth's connections to the Braxtons and his role in the ceremonies suggested that he was deeply involved in the disappearances of the children. Richards felt a growing sense of urgency. They couldn't waste any more time. The longer the circle remained in power, the more children could be in danger. They had already lost too many innocent lives. Richards made the decision to confront Forsyth directly. She knew it would be dangerous, but there was no other choice. If they were going to bring justice to the victims, they had to expose the society and its members. That evening, Richards and Morales paid a visit to Forsyth Manor, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of Maplewood. The mansion loomed like a fortress, its imposing walls and intricate iron gates suggesting a sense of exclusivity and power. The Forsyth family had always been known for their wealth, but few in the town understood just how far that wealth extended. Inside, Richards and Morales were greeted by a woman in her mid-50s who introduced herself as Margaret Forsyth, Charles Forsyth's wife. "We were expecting you," Margaret said, her voice steady but carrying an underlying tension. "Charles has been expecting a visit from the FBI for some time now. I assume you found what you were looking for." Richards exchanged a glance with Morales before stepping forward. "We have reason to believe that your husband is connected to a series of child disappearances in this town, including the Smith family's children. We know about the circle, and we know that your husband was involved in these activities." Margaret Forsyth remained calm, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said flatly. "Charles has always been a pillar of this community. We've contributed to its growth, its prosperity. We've done nothing but good." Richard's patience wore thin. "You can deny it all you want, but we've seen the journals. We know what happened in that estate. The children were taken as part of a ritual, and your husband was one of the key players in it." Margaret's face paled, and for the first time, she seemed to falter. "It's true, isn't it?" she whispered, as if speaking to herself. The arrest of Charles Forsyth and the dismantling of the circle sent shockwaves through the town of Maplewood. The tightly knit community, once ruled by power and secrecy, was now left grappling with the truth about what had been happening beneath the surface for decades. The agents, Richards and Morales, worked tirelessly to piece together the full extent of the conspiracy. They uncovered more details about the circle's practices, how the powerful families in Maplewood had been involved in the ritualistic practices, and how they had controlled the town under the guise of philanthropy and charity. The children who had been taken all those years ago were not the first victims. There had been others, ones that the public had never known about, ones that had been hidden away, erased from history. But thanks to the breakthrough that Richards had made in uncovering the journal of Elijah Braxton, the FBI was able to identify these victims. The agents worked with the remaining families, retrieving long-lost records that traced the disturbing pattern of disappearances back decades. The case had grown more complex as they dug deeper into the history of the rituals. Each child had been selected for their unique qualities: intelligence, innocence, and potential for what the circle believed would make them perfect subjects for their twisted rituals. But the truth had a price. Richards and Morales knew that the emotional toll on the families would never truly heal. No amount of justice could bring the children back or undo the damage caused. Emma Smith, the child whose birthday had been the fateful catalyst for the beginning of this unraveling, was still missing. But with Forsyth's arrest, the door had opened for a new round of inquiries into her case. As Richards sat in her office, reviewing the case files, she couldn't help but feel a sense of despair. She had solved the larger conspiracy, but Emma's family was still without closure. She picked up the phone and called the Smiths, hoping that the answers she had might give them some peace. Sarah Smith, Emma's mother, was still living in the town, though she had never fully recovered from the loss of her daughter. The trauma of that night had reshaped her life, leaving her emotionally and physically drained. Richards met with Sarah in the Smith family home, the same place where Emma had disappeared. The house was eerily quiet, filled with memories of happier times. The air was thick with sorrow. "I know it's been hard," Richards began, sitting down across from Sarah. "But I need to tell you what we found, the truth about what happened to Emma and the other children." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she listened. Richards recounted the details of the investigation, the discovery of the circle, and how Forsyth had been orchestrating the rituals. She explained how the children had been taken for purposes beyond the town's understanding, manipulated by a powerful secret society. Sarah closed her eyes, her hands shaking as she wiped away her tears. "I always knew something was wrong," she whispered, her voice cracking. "But I never imagined it was something this dark, this twisted. How could people do such horrible things to children? My little Emma." Richards reached across the table, placing her hand gently on Sarah's. "We've arrested the people responsible, Sarah. Forsyth is in custody, and the circle no longer has power. You can finally know the truth." But Sarah's gaze remained distant, lost in thought. "It doesn't bring her back," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I don't think anything will ever fill that emptiness." Richards could only nod. She understood. No amount of justice could undo the irreversible damage that had been done to Sarah and to the community. But the arrest of Forsyth and the dissolution of the circle were crucial first steps in breaking the grip of fear that had held Maplewood captive for so long. As Richards and Morales continued their investigation, they managed to track down the remaining missing children. Miraculously, a few had survived, though they were forever scarred by the trauma they had endured. Some had been kept in isolation, hidden away for years, while others had been subjected to mind-altering practices designed to break their spirits and erase their memories. One of the children, Sophie Carter, was found living in a small town several hundred miles away, unaware of her past. Sophie had been taken during a different ritual in the 1980s, and her mind had been manipulated by the circle's leaders. When Richards and Morales finally made contact with Sophie, they were able to help her piece together her past and reunite her with her long-lost family. But not all of the children had been so lucky. Some had been too young to understand what had happened to them, and the years of trauma had left permanent scars. The psychological toll on these children was profound, and Richards knew that the work of healing had just begun. The community of Maplewood would have to come to terms with the reality of what had transpired in their town, and it would take time to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. In the wake of the investigation, the families of the missing children were offered counseling and support. Many of the surviving children returned to their families, though they struggled with memories that they could hardly understand. The Smith family, despite their loss, found solace in knowing that Emma was not a victim of random violence, but the story of the 12 missing children, the secret society that controlled Maplewood, and the darkness that had remained hidden for decades had come to an end. But the impact of these revelations would resonate for years to come. The aftermath of the investigation had left the town forever changed, and its residents were left grappling with the weight of the truth. The question now was, what would they do with that truth? For Agent Emily Richards, the case was far more than just a professional triumph. It had been personal. She had witnessed firsthand the devastation that unchecked power, secrecy, and manipulation could cause. The circle had exploited the most vulnerable, children, and used them as pawns in their quest for control. But the truth had come to light, and while it had not brought back the lost children, it had given the families the one thing they had been denied for so long: answers. In the years following the resolution of the case, Richards continued her work, but she often found herself thinking about the people of Maplewood. The community had been fractured by the events that had unfolded in their midst. Trust had been shattered, not just between neighbors, but within families. The children who had survived the horrors of the circle would have to spend their lives navigating the trauma they had endured. And the parents who had lost their children would have to come to terms with the deep, irreplaceable void in their lives. But Richards also knew that there was hope. The bravery of the surviving children, the resilience of the families, and the courage of those who had stood up against the darkness had given her faith that, despite the deep scars, healing was possible. Justice had been served and the circle had been dismantled, but the town still faced the challenge of rebuilding. The truth, as painful as it was the first step toward that healing. The people of Maplewood needed to acknowledge the darkness that had lived among them, but they also needed to look forward, to rebuild their community and their lives. Richards turned to the families of the victims, urging them to support one another in the difficult years ahead. For the survivors, she encouraged them to seek therapy and support groups, to find strength in numbers, and to remember that they weren't alone. The memories of what happened would never fade, but they didn't have to define who they were. There was a future to build, one that was free from fear and control. For those outside Maplewood, Richards had one message: never ignore the signs. The circle had thrived because people had turned a blind eye, because the darkness had been allowed to grow unchecked. Injustice always starts in the shadows, but it thrives when people refuse to confront it. Stand up for what's right, she said, her voice steady but firm. Be vigilant. Speak out when something doesn't feel right. Protect the vulnerable. Don't let history repeat itself. The world had become a little bit darker because of what happened in Maplewood, but there was light in the community's response. The families were broken, but they were also strong, and together they would heal. It was a long road ahead, but the truth would guide them. The story of the 12 missing children in Maplewood may have concluded, but the repercussions will be felt for generations. The truth, once buried beneath layers of lies and secrecy, has come to light. Families have been torn apart, yet the community now stands at a crossroads. Though the children who survived have returned to their families, they will carry the scars of their experiences forever. The residents of Maplewood will never forget the darkness that lurked in their midst. But in the end, justice prevailed, and the perpetrators of these unspeakable crimes have been held accountable. The circle has been dismantled, its influence shattered, and the town of Maplewood can begin to heal. However, the question remains: how do we move forward from such darkness? As we close this chapter, remember the lessons learned. Stay vigilant. Speak out against injustice, no matter how subtle or powerful. The battle for truth and justice is never truly over. Join us next time as we uncover another story that has been buried, another mystery hidden in the shadows. Subscribe now and stay tuned for more investigations that will make you question everything you thought you knew.